Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of DearBands Live, show where we talk to some music industry professionals and bands about their path throughout their career in audio and music in general. Still ironing out how I want to actually phrase that. Hopping straight into it. Let's wait for a little bit people to get seated, but hopping straight into it tonight. My guest, good friend, Canadian radio personality, host of traveling music industry talk show, Darryl Talks To Bands, Mr. Darryl Spring. Darryl has been in 20-year rock radio veteran with a history spanning Toronto's 102.1 The Edge, Hamilton's Y108, 98.9 The Drive, and Kingston's K-Rock 105.7. Most recently, he was program director, music director, and afternoon drive host at Ottawa's Rebel 101.7. Already 40 episodes in, his new podcast, Darryl Talks To Bands, focuses on in-depth interviews with music/radio industry professionals, independent and touring bands. His passion for music is clear to anyone listening as he continues making great efforts to discover and elevate independent and emerging artists. I see him at the door, taking his shoes off the Canadian way. Darryl?
Hello, Mike.
How's it going?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good. On a scale of nailed it to butchered it, how'd I do on my intro today?
At a 6.
I'm
but
always
fine.
I'm
fun. Good.
It's funny because it's like not to say a big part of teaching is reading PowerPoint stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like sometimes you get ahead of yourself a little bit, or you get behind a little bit.
It's
But I wanted to get all that in there because it's got a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's been a trip for sure.
So how goes?
Good, man. I mean, the same as everybody, I guess, like we're getting back into another COVID winter, and things are seemingly just starting to get a little weird again. So
yeah, that's kind of setting in a little bit. It's just like, it's almost felt like a full year of this.
It's felt like 3, but it's also the vaccines are here and the numbers are going up. So
yeah, no, it's tough, but I don't know. I look at the chart and I just see schools open in September, and then things took off.
Yeah, I have kids too, right? And
yeah.
The thing is, like, what I found, and it's going to be different from like just school to school. They've been really good with the communication. That's on the teachers there. We haven't had a notice that there's been a reported COVID case of anybody to do with the school in a month and a half, or like
okay.
We've had 2 of them since school started. I mean, I'm in Ottawa, so that's just what it's like here in that particular school, right? But yeah, it totally makes sense that is the biggest factor to numbers increase.
It's one of those things you're just like, well, what changed? It's like, well, the school's open, and here in Toronto, it's like schools plus public transit. I remember driving past a bus stop, and it was just all kids and like school kids, and like some of them had masks on, some of them didn't, but they're all kind of like close together and talking and like doing their thing. And I remember thinking like, that's super spreaders if I've ever seen it, because if it's something at school, they can bring it home, and then if the parents are back to work, it can turn into a big thing.
Yeah, so. High school kids are passing joints around. Come on. For sure they are.
I don't know what the kids are up to these days. I don't want to know what the kids are up to these days. But
yeah.
all I know is just like it seems to be that's the one thing that changed in September. And I would say in our area, they did close the school because of an outbreak here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, like it's everywhere. It's there's.
It's been different pockets everywhere. Yeah.
For sure. Ottawa's numbers have been relatively, stable. Just over the bridge in, the Quebec side, things are a little bit worse off there. And then now I'm hearing out in like Calgary too, and like Edmonton. So Alberta had like 1,800 reporting like new cases today, which is bonkers. But all this stuff has a huge effect on, the potential of live music coming back. So like my podcast ended up like it was kind of like COVID tracker for a little while, and there's a 50-person show happening,
Yeah.
And oh no, maybe it's scaling back, and it's been a lot of that, which is not what it was planned to be at all, of course. But
Well, we can just start there because like you had Tense Machine on in, was it February?
Yeah, so I made one trek through southern Ontario, and you guys, I met up with you guys in you know, northern part of Toronto there,
Yeah, one of the
and
rehearsal spaces here, Jam Chambers. Shout out to
yeah,
Jam Chambers.
which was awesome. It was a cool space, great spot
Yeah,
to do a podcast, and that was the idea. It was going to be recorded in different spaces, kind of every time. I'd get bands that are touring and coming through Ottawa, get them in the green rooms because they're just kind of sitting around waiting for something to happen.
yeah,
I mean, you would know that from touring, and you can kind of have good conversations that way too, because they're more at ease. You're in their environment instead of trying to convince them to come into the radio station, and they're worried about traffic and getting back to the venue,
exactly.
and not screwing up their days, but still wanting to play ball with radio and promote the show and all those things. So to me, it just kind of made sense to, it's like, well, let's try to go to them. And, my schedule is a little bit more fluid too. And then I would make these trips to, Southern Ontario, maybe like once a month or so, to kind of get to connect with some other people in the music industry. So I made one trip and launched the podcast like late February, and then a couple weeks later we're like locked down in the early stages of COVID, so everything just turned to Zoom, and it was what it was, but the list of guests that I've had, I look back at it, I'm really proud. Like season 1 is kind of coming. My last real episode is going to be released tomorrow, and then a couple of weeks off, and then coming back in 2021 and doing a lot more video content and stuff like this too. So I'm gonna do the video version and then the audio version of the podcast too.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of a silver lining because you start up Darryl Talks to Bands earlier this year, and again you had your plan for it, and you're saying to travel around, and then this hits, and it's like, I think part of the silver lining is like you can get anybody now, like they're just a Zoom call away or a StreamYard call away.
Yeah, but it's also kind of like, there's so many podcasts, especially in the music area, that like sometimes you need to be like, I've had conversations, and it depends who you get to. If you have direct access to an artist, always go that way, because once you get like management involved, it begins to get a little bit trickier. They're like, well, send us your numbers and all of it. So like I've had a few get away that way that were like big fish that I was looking to get on the podcast. But when they're touring and coming through town,
no, you're right. Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, okay, so, you're going to have like Thornley. I remember leading up to this, there was shows like Thornley or Big Wreck had come through, Theory of a Dead Man, Saint Asonia was coming. So you had all of these like, kind of Canadian heavyweights that were kind of coming through venues like the Bronson Center too. So we're looking, and I think I recorded a couple in venues in Ottawa before. I did one with Broken Love, which was great. That was one of the early episodes as well. Talked to the guys in Royal Tusk. Those both happened at the 27 Club. And whenever possible in those, before COVID started too, much like with you guys, we'd set up the microphones and record like some acoustic versions of the songs too. So there's something unique to those episodes that, versions of songs that you couldn't get anywhere that were, kind of exclusive to the podcast, which I thought was a cool angle to have. And, being in a different venue every time kind of made the podcast unique in a pretty busy field, of music content.
No, the acoustic element of it, like that was a cool thing too. And you're right, there is a lot of time on tour where it's very stressful sometimes to get to the station.
Yeah.
If it's not really, like they'll ask you like, oh, can you be there at 7 a.m. or something? And you're just like, okay, well, this isn't exactly going to work. I know you want to try to promote the show and all this stuff. It's like, that's not working super good. But by being able to meet up with them at the venue, kind of in their element and set up. And again, your rig is great for being able to do that.
Yeah. Like I designed everything to be mobile, and like I can usually be set up within like 10, 15 minutes. And
yeah. As you're chatting with them, yeah, you could just set up.
Yeah, and then it's kind of a way to get to know them a little bit too, because you got to get some small talk in a little bit. I find, instead of just kind of jumping right into something. But at the same time, you might start doing that, and I've cut people off. I'm like, save it. I'm like, don't tell me now. The microphone. I mean, that's a classic radio thing too. People tell hilarious stories in the hallways, and then you bring them into the thing, and they kind of
doesn't really
clam up a little bit. So you always got to save it for the microphone if something good is happening and you're not recording it.
So you're 40 episodes in. How's the process been? Like,
yeah, it's funny because in the beginning, like I did that trip and I came back with so many interviews, and then it was like, at first it was like, oh, if I'm doing a weekly, I've got months so so I was kind of doing 2 interviews per episode in the early part, because I had a long list of people that I wanted to get to and so many ideas, and they were longer too, right? Because you have 2 guests, like some of them are pushing 2 hours, I think, and it becomes a lot of logistics, the planning and scheduling and coordinating times and doing all the social media and editing the shows down and doing all these things, right? It becomes pretty labor intensive. And I mean, when you're doing everything, solo, I'd love to have somebody who took care of social media. I mean, that would be great. I try to just grab things from like, my collection or whatever for Instagram and stuff like that. If it's related to a date, that works well too. But then eventually I started to kind of space them out a little bit. And by that, I mean the interviews just being 1 per episode, and not try to overdo it each time. And keep it to about, I aim to be half hour to 45 minutes. So if you can have like a good conversation, a couple songs thrown in there throughout, I usually do my little spiel at the beginning and ending of each episode, so that I think it just kind of slightly evolved into where it is now. And I think like the last, probably the last half of this season. So it really kind of found its groove in terms of a format for the show, and keeping it to, a little bit tighter. You're still having longer, great conversations. But I didn't find that I had to just keep going. Whereas in the early point, I wanted to make the interviews longer. Like one of my best episode is Taylor Momsen. And one of the nice things, is that I find it nice, is that when you deal with a big artist, it was set up through their label. So I wasn't dealing with management. I was dealing with the label. And they say, like, you have 25 minutes and don't go over it. And so you're aware of that, right? So you don't waste any time when you have 25 minutes. It's like you're leaving stuff out that you wanted to get to. And then afterwards, probably thinking, oh shit, I should have done that. Or I should have asked that. But that one, there was a couple good laughs in that episode. She's a big name. I grabbed lots of clips. You can't use, big artists, and especially when it's going through their label, you can't put copyrighted music in a podcast that people can download. So I use a lot of clips, and she was doing some really cool stuff through their Instagram account. Some Soundgarden covers with Matt Cameron, and I mean, her voice is just bananas. And she really fit those songs well. So it's like, I really wanted to include because we're talking about it. I feel like, yeah, you've probably seen it, but if not, or even if you have, it's just nice to have that reference point, like to have the audio of it. So you throw in like, 20 seconds and, try to make it as seamless as possible and make it sound kind of, slick. And I like doing that part, actually. Like, that's what I like doing. Shows where there's a bit of post-production where it's going to a song, and those transitions, I usually use a little bit of radio static or sometimes record scratches and stuff, and little break beats and music beds, and like I've always liked messing around with audio and music. So to me, that's it's kind of fun. It's the trouble is when it's become a deadline. It's like, okay, Tuesday at 9, and Saturday I'm always like, oh, I've got so much time, I'll get to this later. And then it's like, here I am at like 12:30 on Monday, still like, cutting up images for the episode or whatever. But it's the show that I always kind of wanted to do. In radio, I always did it like a daily show, or like a weekends or overnights, or that's what I started when I was doing the Edge. But then I did like middays and afternoons. I wanted to do a weekly show. Like, give me an hour, 2 hours, maybe 2 hours, or maybe an hour show, because then you don't leave them wanting more. Don't overdo it. But that's what I always wanted to do, whether it was interviewing and talking about new music, or doing, kind of some deep dives on artists or albums, or, I had a few kind of different ideas that I liked. But yeah, it's tough. It's harder and harder to do that content in radio now, because everybody is spread so incredibly thin. It's just, you're probably not, you're definitely not getting extra money to do a show like that, unless it gets picked up and syndicated. But if you're just like, I want to do this, and they'll be like, yeah, sure. If you're lucky, go for it.
Thin is in just job duties.
Well,
like,
yeah,
a lot of hats.
Yeah, it's gone. I think it's been accelerated by COVID. There's been so much that's happened in the last like month and a half to people in the radio business. Entire stations have been cleaned out. 89X in Windsor, gone. Yeah. Entire staff gone, and it's a country station now. And there's more and more of that happening. There at one point, every station had a program director, and then it became, okay, every market had a program director, and now there's like, some companies have like 6 program directors, so they're responsible for not just multiple stations, but multiple markets now. The fortunate thing that I had in the last couple of gigs that I had, was I had multiple hats. Like, my last 2 program director jobs, I was also the music director at both of those stations, and I also did a show. So, I mean, to do a good music log, you got to put some time into it. To do a good show, you got to put some prep time into it. And so many days I just flew by the seat of my pants going on air. Like, I would go in with like a couple things that I'd found interesting over the course of the day through, news feeds or whatever, right? It's like, oh, there's a good story. I always have my artist stuff that's kind of like ongoing, like there's certain things about an artist that are relevant sometimes for a week or for a month. And, you'll mention that, or maybe do some content around that. Cause I was really a pretty intensive show. I tried to, I think I was dry and sarcastic. I tried to have funny moments in my show, but I wasn't like a comedy. Like, I think I'm more of a music guy than, the entertainment of
right
that kind of host. But you try to throw some of that in, and some of it's spontaneous too, right? I find the best moments, the funniest things that happened on my show, or like some of my favorite moments, were things that were spontaneous that you didn't prep, because they're more natural. They feel more genuine. I hate it when I can just, and from being in radio, like, my perspective is going to be different than most people's, but I can see the out, or whatever the point is, coming a mile away. And if it's a groaner and you see it coming, it's just like, oh, come on, just do better.
Well, it's always different if you're in the industry and like, what's behind the curtain.
Yes.
And if you have a different perspective. And a very, very short story. I was recording comedy at Yuck Yucks here in Toronto for Sirius XM back in my early days. It was an easy gig, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. And half jokingly, I was just there as the goat in case there's anything wrong with the Pro Tools rig, because it's going to kick out. It's just inevitable. But with a lot of the headliners, like, they perform twice, and it's like they would do the early show and they do the late show. And I remember like, cause I can't laugh that loud because the room mics are like near me, so I can't be the star of the laugh track. But just watching the delivery of the comedians, and then they do the next show and it'd be the same, maybe a couple variations, but it's like the same thing. And it was still fun but it wasn't the same kind of funny seeing it the second time.
You
And I
back curtain there.
well, yeah, because you see it, you're like, whoa, like this is really good. And then it's like seeing bands on tour. Like when you go tour with a band and you're like, you see them for 20 shows in a row, and you see the banter's the same. And you see like the little things. There's a part where, he goes to have his drink and he like, spills a little bit on himself to make it look like he's drunk, and he looks at the crowd. It's like, oh no, that's a bit. That's a gag from the show. And people think that it's like really, not to say that it's really, I'm probably ruining live shows for people that are missing live shows right now, but it's just like you start to see behind the curtain a little bit, like what makes the show work for the audience. But if you're on the other side and you see behind the curtain, it kind of loses a little bit of its magic, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, even if you just see one show, sometimes you can kind of tell the way
that's a bit.
The way that they're interacting. This is a scripted thing. They've planned this out. But the best ones, again, in those situations are things that kind of happen that, I mean,
it's not on script. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless they're just really good at pulling this off. Like I used to think I'm a big Queens of the Stone Age fan. So one of Josh's things, I mean, it was a while ago now. He's I think his persona's kind of changed a little bit. Or actually it's changed quite a bit. But there used to be like a thing, and I thought it was a shtick, where he'd pick out someone at a show and just kind of berate them a little bit. And sometimes more than a little bit, and it was funny because most of them seemed kind of lighthearted, and it was usually because someone was throwing something at the stage. Like that seemed, and he would really lay into them. Like there's one on their live DVD CD, Over the Years and Through the Woods, that is like legendary. He tried to play in the UK, and for whatever reason, the tours get canceled. Their band was sick or were anyhow. They finally got to play there, and some guy threw something, and he stopped the show, and he's like, "That guy, you right there in the striped shirt, yeah, you." And it goes on for a while, and it ends with like, "Eat a bag of dicks, you cock smoking." Sorry, but there's a talent to. And I think a bit of a gift to being able to string words together like that, as foul as they are. But for them to come off with something that really, and it comes down to comedian kind of timing too, right? Like what you were saying is you can't just say a bunch of filth.
There's a method.
Yeah.
There's a formula.
There's a technique to that. And yeah, he seemed to have it. Everything changed after he kicked the photographer, though, and then his tune changed quite a bit.
Yeah, no, that's a no.
Yeah, that was bad. That was bad.
Don't kick the media.
No, I think he was super effed at that show though. Like he also sliced his face with a razor blade and said like "F Muse" because they were the headliner or something. He was not right that night. There's something not good happening.
It was not at his best. Not at his best that night.
Maybe go home to rest.
There's one thing I want to go back to for a second, because you talk about starting the podcast up and like realizing how much more work was involved with it. Because I feel like there's a lot of times where people have ideas, and especially this year, because it's been the year of like starting things, like for starting idea. Because it's like everyone's had to make a lot of lemonade this year, and try to figure out ways to kind of get through it.
Great way to put it.
Yeah, and it's like you try stuff, some stuff doesn't work, some other stuff works, but like getting into the podcast, it's like, okay, well, I'll get some guests and I'll get a rig and I'll go. But then like realizing that maybe that 1 hour of recording time might actually be 5 to 10 hours of actual like post time. And you talk about social media and stuff, like there's so many things, and the idea of it taking, the better part of half a year to feel like you've kind of found your stride with how you want to do it, and then start making, continue making tweaks on it, but just like, you've got the core of what you want to do now.
Yeah, I think anyway, things are going to evolve as they go along. Like I had so many ideas before it launched. I mean, I bounced a lot of them off you. We had chatted about, a number of things, and once it gets up and going, then you figure out what some of the bugs are. And like, I also did a lot more in terms of trying to, get some, even just like simple video content for Instagram that promoted the show. So I'd voice like promos and then put up like a bunch of still images through them with, saying who's coming up on the podcast or whatever. And those took a lot of time. So in the early going, like I was, and this was, I was doing like stay at home parenting in COVID as well. So like I was busy like 9 to 4 most days. And then like I had the evenings to then work on the podcast. So like my early parts of like March, April, May were like grinds. And like, I don't know why I put so much of a workload on myself. What the hell? But it's also, it's like, I was really happy with the final product on a lot of the episodes too. So there's a kind of a satisfaction that goes along with that. And like the key is being consistent. I mean, if you can go through some, like the number of podcasts, it's overwhelming how many podcasts there are. And some last like 5-6 episodes, and then people lose their kind of, go get them attitude that they had before they launched it. So I think if you're going to try to keep building something, you have to really commit to it and be like, okay, I'm going to do this. And every week I'm going to deliver a decent show. And the more you get into it, people think it gets easier, but you've also gone through a number of people. You're going through your Rolodex, and you're trying to keep planning for a couple weeks ahead. And as COVID went on and bands weren't touring, that became more and more challenging. Because like I said, when they're touring, there's this weekly kind of, then it's keeping up with like the scheduling of it. It's like, so-and-so's coming to town. I got to reach out to that person. Can I, and so there's more to keep track of, but then there's also, there's a lot more available potential content there as well. So it's everyone's got to figure, everyone's different. Every case is, every podcast, every piece of content is, you got to kind of figure it out.
You mentioned the 6 or 7 episodes, and I was just looking into things today. I saw that you'd already got to 40, and I was like, well, yeah, of course you got to 40. You started, like we talked to him back in February, but that's one of the things too, with some people that have had ideas to start things this year, or be it Twitch, or be it, YouTube stuff or channels or anything. I'm just like, get to 10 episodes and then figure out, because I feel like once you hit 10, your next milestone's 100. And then figure out if you want to do it. Just get to 10, figure out if you want to do it, know how much work goes into it, and then go, okay, my next milestone's going to be 100 from there. Because and again, with the DearBands, it's always meant with love. There's a lot of times where we start something and we don't really follow it through that well in the music world.
I love the DearBands tweets. Like, just the tweets were great, or like you put them on Facebook too, and it was just a good piece of advice, usually with a little bit of, a little bit
of spice on it sometimes, but it's always meant with love. But it's just like, there's just things you see. And you're like, what is going on here? But I'm always encouraging of things. Whenever someone wants to start something, I'm like, do it. We have all these tools available these days. And like, even thinking 10 years ago, it's like, yeah, you could start a podcast 10 years ago, but like we were lacking a few of the tools that we have right now. Like, what are you using to post your podcast?
So mine is hosted on Simplecast.
Okay.
Which is even like the basic level account for Simplecast has got some pretty good analytics to it. So you can see geographically where your downloads are happening. What countries, and which platforms, and which episodes are, it gives you like your top 10. So there's some good data there, and some of it's really interesting. Like, I consistently get downloads in Berlin each week. There's usually some in Australia. Australia's fallen off in the last couple of weeks or so, but Australia was like a consistent weekly one too, and like different parts of Europe and down through the States. So it's really kind of cool to see that. I guess artists get similar kind of things on the back end of Spotify. You get a lot of data of where things are going. And it's tough for podcasts because you're not just getting someone to listen to a couple minutes. You're asking someone to commit some time there. And like I said, there's a lot of podcasts out there. So what are you doing to kind of, try and stand out, which is a tough thing. because you want to keep it genuine and not make it seem like you're, grasping.
Yeah, no, I know what you're getting at with some of the personalities and hosts and what they're actually doing.
People just want to be overly controversial to draw attention to themselves.
Yeah,
that's what I'm kind of saying.
Yeah, no, I know we could talk about Trapped for half an hour, but
man, if you're in the music industry and your name is Chris Brown, your chances are you're an asshole. I
half joke about it. I don't want to spend too much time on it. I half joke about it. I'm just like, he's done a better job than most musicians this year getting attention. There's definitely some bad press, but like
there is such a thing as bad
Facebook headlines all year.
It's crazy, but that's the world, right? Like, he's just brought the politics into the music, which is bands are going to comment on it in their songs, but I think they should leave it there. He's been just too loud in these crazy far right-wing conspiracy bullshits, and I felt
bad for his band, like his bandmates, because it's just like it's Chris's band. They're not taking votes on the bus about things, and it's like,
but why in one song in 2003? Like, why are we even talking about?
There's lots of bands.
Put out a lot of music.
It's lots of bands that have had one song. But just like, I felt bad for the band because it's like he's touring.
Song, though. Like, that shit wasn't even a good song.
It's still making money. It's still a hit. It's hit's a hit.
It's true. They're hard to come by, so that's fair.
Yeah, so like that the hit's a hit, but it's just like, I felt bad for his bandmates because it's like they're hired to be there, and like that's the head of the ship right there that you're standing behind. And I did kind of put my hand up and like, how long until the band's just like, we gotta go, like, or you potentially, if you back somebody in their views, it's like you hit a point where like people just assume those are your views as well because you're not saying anything.
Yeah, like, imagine you really disagree with all of his politics that he's so loud about, and you're in the band and you're out there like, just playing every night and listening to him, say his crazy stuff that oh man, that's got to be hell. That's got to be hell.
No, and it's tough because I understand, like, if it's a good gig, you want to keep it, but at what point are you like, I don't think what's the term? It's not a hill worth dying on.
Yeah, is the thing you want to die on? Yeah.
So yeah, it's been interesting. I don't spend too much time talking about that, but yeah. Anyways,
I thought about actually just bringing everything back somehow to CTB tonight, but I was like, no, I'm not gonna, like, because it's so easy to just lambaste that guy, but it's not.
Positive. Got to move on, and hopefully some of that stuff is out of the news feed on my end. And
part of it actually is sad too. A couple of weeks ago, I did an episode about this group Over the Bridge. It's all about mental health in the music industry, and part of the intro on that episode, I said, the destruction of mental health is so celebrated. It's part of the fabric of rock and roll, kind of sex, drugs, and that whole deal. Like when Wes Scantlin was having very public meltdowns of Puddle of Mud, it just becomes your entertainment for the day. It's like, oh, look at this crazy video, but that's someone who's seriously messed up, who's just trying to find their way.
They're sick.
Yeah.
And people keep sending them back out. And Scott Weiland, it's like he was dying. He was dying right before people's eyes, and they just kept sending him back. It's like watching a boxer where it's done. Like, throw in the towel, like they need help, and they keep sending them back out. And then when the inevitable happens, everyone's like, oh, it's too bad. Like, it's so sad. It's like, oh, they went too young. It was too soon. It's like, well, what were you doing to help that situation?
Yeah, Scott Weiland was he did an interview at The Edge like days before he died, and it's like, you watch it and you're like, oh my God, look at him.
Good.
One of the most charismatic frontmen of our generation, like coming up in the 90s. Scott Weiland like commanded attention. Like, maybe the music's a little bit different, but he had the charisma of like a Bon Scott kind of frontman, I thought. And when you see him reduced to what he he was in those last couple of days, and like that interview, like I said, just a few days before he died, is, man, you feel horrible. You just feel horrible.
Yeah, and it's right there, and in hindsight, it's clear as day. But like, I remember saying that, and like, this guy is not healthy. And we talk about the the state of mental health in music and stuff. And I think there's a lot of people, because people have their vices, people have their demons, and it's like, don't promote that. And one of the things, I don't know how in depth I want to get into it, but like watching Buck Cherry. And knowing Josh Todd's history, and knowing that he's got to go and play lit up, and knowing that there's the spiel around that. And it's like, there's times where I see him on stage, great band, great front man, really fun songs, toured them a few times, but like watching him go through the motions of that. And even just like, as the show goes on, the clothes come off more and more, and his physique's there. And again, playing into kind of the vices and drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. And like getting into that song, and how they stretch that song out for like 10 minutes, 12 minutes, some nights, 15 minutes. Like, it's a big event, and watching the reaction of people in the crowd, and they're just like, yeah, like blackout drunk, almost ODing drug abuse. This is cool. And you're like, no, it's not. It's not cool at all. Like, even, you know what I mean? Like, even just pretending about it. Like, I get that we're all in the moment, want to, release a little bit here, but it's just at the same time, it's like, for someone that fought that battle, got better, and now has to go and relive it to make their paycheck at the expense of
weird.
Yeah. It's like it's a weird, when you put it on the blackboard and look at it, you're just like, this is kind of weird that we're celebrating this sort of thing. So
yeah, I just saw in the chat, someone said, just look at Chester's lyrics. For sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Chris Cornell lyrics that you look at and hear. Blow up the outside world. The first line of that song, I remember there was a song they played on the station, and like after that happened, that comes up, and you're like, oh my god, like shit. The opening line of that song is "Ain't found a way to." No, what is it? Anyhow, I'm not sure. There's a couple songs that are just like that.
Someone will fact check in the comments. The first,
yeah, we'll fact check.
That's what that's part of the system here. But yeah,
I'm thinking when this is going to be over. I can see it on his face.
Oh, that's my turn. My turn's on YouTube. It's all good.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with that. This is how I navigate the world.
No, my turn's good. He's regular on the Tense Machine podcast.
All right.
On the
What's up, my turn?
He's good. He's good. Man with love. But yeah, back with the mental health thing. It's like that's been one thing that, like, I feel we've tried to pass that along to people, especially with some of the fans that, like, they joke about it, and it's like, no, because like you can lose friends this way. And like, there's a lot of people in music where there's a lot of people in music industry in general, like, it's a tough job. There's a lot of high highs and a lot of low lows. There's a lot of the extreme poverty. There's a lot of extreme wealth. It's like, there's very rarely you're just kind of sitting comfortably in the middle of all these things and just enjoying life. It's always extremes all the time. And
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's like, I think that is one thing. Just keep trying to, when people want to talk about mental health, or even not to rant here for a second, but even at CMW a couple of years ago, talk about Saint Asonia. They had Adam Gontier was part of one of the keynote panel talking about mental health in the music industry. And
yeah, look at his lyrics again too.
Yeah.
Right, a lot that's right there.
Yeah, and he talked about it, and then when it got to the Q&A section, it was like, hi, my name is Sarah. I'm 23. I'm a singer-songwriter. I've been sober for 6 months. Hi, I'm Mark. I'm a guitar player, and this is my band. I've been sober for 2 years. And I'm just like, whoa, like, this is heavy.
Yeah.
And like, they're looking to him for inspiration and like, positive energy to keep going, because like, he's lived the dream as far as they're concerned. And they just want to be seen by him for a second and go, I'm struggling too. And yeah, it was just, it was like really heavy. When they were talking
for
about
every
stuff.
Adam Gontier though, there's a lot of, Kurt's and Chester's and Chris Cornell's,
Yeah.
Names that nobody's ever heard of, but are trying to find the same path. And it's a tough thing, because like, how do you, I think there's also some performers that are at their, and it's Scott Weiland might have fallen into this category, sadly, is that as a performer, he seemed to be at his best, especially when he was younger, but also when he was at the peaks of some of his abuse, like drug abuse, like I don't, certain drugs, I guess the ones that like the upper kind of drugs are for someone who goes out and performs and gives that level of energy, it's going to give you an edge. But it's not sustainable. That's the thing.
No.
And so people are going to be like I saw Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie when they came through, and what a difference between those two performers on stage. Marilyn Manson I was embarrassed for him. Like it was bad. Like he's just drunk and lazy. He threw like 5 microphones, getting pissed off at the sound guy. And at one point he was sitting at the edge of the stage and people are all just like grabbing him and stuff. And it's like, this is this old man, weird and sad. And then Rob Zombie comes out and he's like high energy and he's like jumping and kicking and you just could, and they're about the same age,
Yeah.
and it couldn't have been different. So, what are those two guys doing differently? Because Rob Zombie has the same appearance of, crazy rock and roll lifestyle as Marilyn Manson does, but maybe Marilyn Manson has genuinely been living it too long and Rob Zombie has overcome it and figured life out, but still his brand. It's that was eye-opening.
Yeah, no, it is a thing. I guess, again, back with Josh Todd, it's like I could see like he has his persona and he can still channel that and go and deliver. But it's like, I don't believe, because you see people wandering around backstage and before shows, I don't believe he's still living that lifestyle. And I give him massive props for being able to find the balance between the two, between that persona and, his offstage, personality. My term was just saying, like, our drugs really rampant in the musician world. I would say yes and no. I say there's definitely some circles where it's more accepted. And I found in some of those circles where it's more accepted, if you're not part of that circle, they kind of don't want you there because they feel like maybe you're frowning upon what they're doing. And they would rather you just not be here because it makes them feel bad sometimes. And vice versa. I've seen people that just don't want to hang out with certain circles because they're just like, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to just stand around.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Do you remember that scene? Those scenes in Dewey Cox where it's like they open those part of this. It starts off with marijuana. It's like, is it addictive? No. Does it?
It's absolutely not addictive. It's the greatest thing in the world. Do you want any part of this?
But then it gets progressively worse, right?
And that's the part of it. It's just like not to turn this into how people should live their lives, sort of things. Adults are free to make those choices, but it's seeing there's already like a blueprint for how bad things can get, and it's like people get further and further down that, and they further have problems, and you're just like, well, what did you think was going to happen? Why did you think it was different with some of these things? And it's tough. And the last thing I would say about it too, it's like we have this generation of musicians right now that think if you're not making $300,000 a year playing guitar, you're a failure. And it's like, well, no, you could make a reasonable living being a musician, but like you can't show up drunk and high all the time at your job unless your job is to be drunk and high all the time. Yeah. And someone's paying you just to do that, in which case they're probably making way better money than you are because like you're not paying attention to the books probably at that point either.
No, you have no concept. Like it's sometimes amazing that they can get up and play the songs, to be honest. Like, I guess it becomes second nature after you
muscle memory. Cause I've had a couple musicians say that they're just like, they've been like, they can't even tell you what city they're from, but they know exactly how to play the songs because it's so ingrained at that point.
You know what's kind of amazing?
Crazy.
There's a documentary about Glen Campbell, and Glen Campbell, he's known as the Rhinestone Cowboy, but was an amazing session musician as well. And he is going through. I think he's still alive. I'm not sure, but he was going through Alzheimer's, and like he was talking to his third wife and confused her, obviously, like for his first, and didn't know, like so many things that he. But you put a guitar in his hand and he could play still amazingly. And like if your brain is gone, that you don't remember the people that you love, but you can pick up an instrument and remember your songs and play them. That just tells you that music affects the brain in just like a different way.
Yeah.
There's something kind of magical about that.
No, it's actually a lovely wife and I were chatting about today, just like the people that lose loved ones before their eyes because of like dementia or Alzheimer's, and you're just like, it's got to be super sad. But as you're saying, like sometimes you put the instrument or you put the paintbrush or something back in their hands, and it's just like that part's still very much there. So,
yeah, I think that's when, especially for performers, it's the one thing that they focus and that makes them special. So they're always going to kind of focus all their energies and effort towards that. But they could be terrible people in every other aspect of their lives, if the drugs and the addictions are out of control, like obviously.
Yeah, no, that could be another stream altogether, because like I if I ever get to a point, I'd love to have a couple musicians on that have battled and have them chat about stuff, because I'm curious to hear how they talk about it amongst themselves. And
one of the cool things about the podcast, we can move on after we've spent a lot of time on mental health.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
But one of the cool things in the podcast was Rich Bento. Finger 11 in San Antonio, and he reached out to me, and he had some like very personal, tough stories to tell. He's risen above it now. He's gotten past it. He's got a great wife and a kid, and everything's positive. He's playing in another band now, but he hit some pretty dark lows, and like addiction was a big part of it. And he told his story honestly. And to me, that was really just kind of an amazing thing, because he messaged me on Instagram, and I was just like, oh my God, like this is, of course we'll do this episode. I think that's an important thing. And then there's the Over the Bridge one, which is just a couple episodes back. So it's relevant conversations during COVID, because it's not just the livelihood that's gone. It's also that expression and that outlet, that creative thing that musicians just have to do. I said it in that episode. It's like, I think that, for touring musicians, a lot of them would probably, even if there's no money at all, none, which there, in a lot of cases, there barely is, that some would do it and they would pay to go do it. Like guys pay to go play in beer league hockey that are never going to get a paycheck for doing that, No? You don't think so?
No, absolutely. That's the thing. It's like, I pay for my adult rec hockey because I love it. It's my exercise and social life, but it's like, I know that's what it is.
Right. Exactly. But that's where music can get kind of
for some people. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people that can make a living as a touring musician that are never going to, have 7 figures, paychecks, royalties coming in, there's a big gap, and it like the gap between that, it's like, I don't even know how you really get to that anymore. You got to do it yourself almost, if you can build the following online, that's what it seems to be. That's the ultimate litmus test.
The community. Yeah.
Is yeah. And, the best doesn't always rise to the top. The general public's taste is pretty, lowest common denominator sometimes. I mean, if you look at, I love hip hop, but I just don't get modern hip hop. Like I just don't get it. I don't. But it's huge. You look at the numbers on some of the mumble rap and trap stuff, like the SoundCloud numbers are bananas. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I hear you. That's a whole other. We could go on for another hour about that. 50 minutes in. Do you got another 20 minutes?
Yeah, we can keep going.
Okay.
We've got no particular plan for the rest of the night, and I'm enjoying this conversation. So let's go.
Okay.
I'm in it.
So you started in radio 20 years ago. You can either go the short form or longer form. Longer form would be tell us about how you got started in radio. Short form, give us a story early in radio.
Okay, so the early part for me is kind of the interesting thing of how I got into radio, because I was definitely not one of those kids that grew up dreaming about being on the radio, which is what a lot of people in radio will tell you when you ask them this question. I always kind of was drawn to music, and that was always a big deal for me. Like I can remember almost every year through school based on what was the big song, you know, like grade 5, it's Bust a Move. Grade 6, it's like, like I could do this for every year. So music was always a kind of like a thing. I went to like music classes in school. You know, I wasn't very talented necessarily. You know, I was a very substandard drummer is what I ended up being. I played a little bit of saxophone and clarinet, you know, growing up, but then, you know, I discovered turntables, which you can still
it's in the background there.
Yeah. See right there. And started DJing with friends when I was like, you know, 12, 13, 14, house parties. I grew up in Scarborough, so it was a lot of like, it was hip hop, house, and a lot of dance, like reggae, the 45s. You know, a lot of Buju Banton and Mad Cobra and stuff like that. I still love that, to be honest. And so I started to figure out DJing and beat matching, and then like Toronto in the mid 90s was a hub for jungle and drum and bass. Like next to the UK, it was the biggest destination in the world for that music for this couple of years. And I discovered that music in like 93, you know, started DJing it in about 96, and then started, you know, playing at events and stuff in about like 97. And we ended up eventually getting a radio show through doing that on Chin in Toronto. So Chin, they would go like midnight to 5 would be the Global Groove Network, and DJs would just come in and do like mixed shows and stuff like that. And I remember I recorded a couple IDs with a producer. Like any DJ that came in, they would be like, well, here, get a couple IDs that we can run like, you know, during the show or, you know, wherever. And
what are IDs?
So it's just like something you would record that would identify you. So, okay, I remember what mine is. So I DJ'd under the name Derail, and I was at the time we were from Scarborough, so we were like the East End kind of like drum and bass kind of collective, I guess you could say. There was a number of us that were from Scarborough that DJ'd, and so I was like, "Yo, it's Derail," and when I'm up in Scarborough, I got it locked on Jungle Airwaves on, you know, Chin 100.7 in Toronto, that kind of thing. And he said, he's like, you know, a lot of people come in and they sound horrible. He's like, that's pretty good. And so I took that, and I just loved going into the radio station. Like I had a day job at the time, so we would get out of there at like 5 a.m, go for breakfast, and then off to like your 9 to 5
work.
Yeah, shit you can do in your early 20s, right? And so that was fun. And I just decided, it's like, well, I hate this job. What if I went to school for radio? And then I just followed that as kind of far as I could. You know, rock and alternative rock, I grew up listening to CFNY and The Edge. So like amongst all of these other kind of musics that I was into, that was always kind of like the constant. Like when I listened to the radio, a lot of it was like Energy 108 and CFNY growing up was where like all the coolest shit to me was happening. That's where the DJ shows, like, you know, the live to airs, especially see like guys like Deadly Headley. And I mean, if there's anybody of a certain vintage on the stream, they'll know what I'm talking about. But, you know, a lot of it started with what Chris Shepherd was doing too. Like he started at CFNY, went over to Energy 108, became, you know, a big star. But a lot of those shows, those late night live, you just never, like, that's where I discovered electronic music. And it was like, what is this? This music sounds like crazy.
Do you remember Brave New Waves?
Brave New Waves. I don't know. No, that doesn't ring.
It was a CBC show, but it was one of those ones that was on between like midnight and 3 or 4 a.m.
Okay.
And they would just, they would play like 2 hours of indie music and then like 2 hours of really experimental music, like super weird stuff. And one of the places I lived, we had like a stereo system in the living room of the loft. And they're like, we can't listen to this at night. It's way too space noise and abducted by aliens and stuff. We got to turn it off. So.
Yeah. Well, there was a ton of great stuff on CIUT. I mean, there's still some great programming on there. CKLN before, which is now Indie 88. There was a jungle show on CKLN that I listened to for years too, the Rinse Out show with Medicine Muffin Rick. He worked at Play to Record. It was such a tight, like that community was fun, but I think things started to change a little bit too. Like by the time I kind of like, I wanted to do something different, because for a few years I was pursuing DJing as like, I'm going to try to grow this, and I'm going to try to take this as like to the furthest level that I kind of can. And ultimately, like, if you're not really producing, what are you? You're just a guy with a record collection, and there's a lot of DJs in the scene that were just that. And not that it was really, I DJ'd so I could buy records. Really, it the old joke was like, oh, jungle owes me money, because you spend so much money on records, but don't make that. You make like $50 to DJ. Well, like, that's what it turned into eventually, because there's so many people that were willing to do it cheaper, which is kind of what program directors will say to talent too. Like, if you want more money or something, it's like, well, there's 100 people that want your job. So, that kind of thing. So that's how I got into radio, and then like I wound up in Timmins for a while, and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And I was there longer than most. Like, I was in Timmins over 2 years, where some people came like a year, 9 months, and they would go on to like another medium market, and they would kind of work their way up. But I kept pestering Alan Cross at the Edge. Every time there was a posting, I kept sending him stuff. Like, I sent him this Alice Cooper interview that I did, and he started to know me as, he's like, oh, you're the Alice Cooper guy. So I'm like, he knows who I am now. That's good. And eventually I got a job there. It was like, when I went from doing mornings in Timmins, which is kind of top of the food chain in that market, and I think I was making $28,000 a year. This is in like 2005. Which even by 2005 standards is terrible, but it's pretty cheap to live in Timmins. Like, I had the top floor for
inflation, cost of living, not too bad.
Yeah. And I ended up eventually getting a job at the Edge, but it was for like a couple shifts a week at like $15 an hour. And he told me what it is. And I was like, I don't care. I want it. It's a foot in the door. I want it. Got family in Toronto. I can find other, gigs to kind of make some cash in the meantime. And, then I just started going to more music meetings and being around the station during some daytime hours, because if you don't do that, you're just like some guy on overnights. Like, nobody knows who you are. Like, listeners might know who you are, but nobody at the station knows who you are unless you're there.
See you,
yeah. So I started doing a lot of that.
What age is this? What age is this?
So this would have been like mid-20s, because I remember my birthday's on the 24th of November, and I turned 24 on the 24th when I was in Timmins. And it was like it was the saddest, most pathetic thing ever, because I had just moved into an apartment. I had like no furniture yet. I didn't even have cable. I think my parents came up and they had dropped off like a couple bits of furniture, like a few things, and then they left. And so I spent the day, which is they say it's like your champagne birthday. It's supposed to be a big one, right? Like, where it's like you do crazy shit. And I spent it by myself in like a 400 square foot apartment with no cable. And I was like, my God,
I'm not sure what I did here.
Yeah, I misplayed this hand. But then I look back at it now, and I wouldn't have changed anything. Those 2 years were a lot of fun. Because everybody in media there is in the same boat. They're not from there, and it's their first gig. So you meet a lot of people. There's a built-in kind of social circle. In those days, none of those jobs exist. All of those jobs are gone now. And then from there, I got into the Edge, which was like, when I got into radio, was the only place that I wanted to truly work. Was like, man, if I could get a chance to work there someday, that would be cool. And I'm glad I got in the era that I did, because I feel like I caught the tail end of some amazing things that used to happen there. And I'm talking about the live to airs, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the retro show, Indie Hour, Punkorama, all that stuff, which is also all gone now. It meant a lot. It meant a lot to me back then. And it's weird, because I feel nothing about that station anymore, which if I could have told my, 28-year-old self that, one day you would look back at this and be like, oh man, it's all just, I would have thought, oh man, that'd be a real bummer. And it kind of is, but things change,
It's a chapter.
It's a chapter, and each generation, like our generation might have been the last ones that kind of really wanted to go out to bars just to hear someone, play CDs, which is, but like the Phoenix Saturday nights was a staple. I just don't think that stuff is, I mean, especially kind of moving forward, who knows what any of it looks like. But yeah, I think that's just a thing of the days gone by. Sound like old people now.
No, it's definitely, there's been transition period over 10 years, 20 years, and like to for someone to say that there hasn't been, it's like, what industry are you talking about? And you've gone from different stations and you've seen how some of the turnovers happen and shuffling around, or when they've changed formats, or but back with the Edge thing, it's just like that's a very common thread with a lot of the stories that I hear from people. It's just like they're just looking for their way in to some of these places, or these businesses, companies. It's like, be it a window, be it a door, whatever. It's just like, hey, it's $15 an hour. You're going to be doing this. You're like, yep, I'll take it. And then
the experience is valuable. That, like, as someone who had been in the business for just a couple of years, to suddenly have Dave Bookman, Martin Streak as your colleagues, and Alan Cross as your boss. Like, to me, that was just like, I love those guys. I grew up listening to all of them. Even the Dean Blundell show back, like Dean, Jason, and Todd was like, that show was killer for like 10 years. I don't think it survives in the climate this year. And even some of the people I remember hearing someone say something that's like, oh, the misogynistic morning show or whatever. And I was like, oh, all right, well, I mean, stylistically they're very different, but I kind of get it. But all of those people were people that I looked up to for different reasons. When I was in Timmins doing my co-host and I, this guy JC, we had a really good show for young, jocks, that broadcasters that were pretty green, not a lot of experience. We had, there was actually something there, and we would listen to the Blundell show through the Q speaker while we were playing like Loving It in an Elevator and Whitesnake and stuff like that. So we would just be listening to them and trying to emulate some of the stuff from that show on a level that wouldn't get us fired, and so it's one of those things when you go from being in that position to all of a sudden, like I did overnights and Dean would come into the studio and start prepping. It's like, well, like, Jesus Christ, like a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to this guy through the Q speaker being like, man, imagine working there. And like, I'm here now. Like I kind of would look around sometimes on the overnights, you get burnt out. Like you're getting into like 4 o'clock in the morning where it's like, no one's really listening. And there's still another, hour and a half to go. It can feel like a bit of, you're like, oh, you just want to go to bed, right? But then at the same time, look at the logos on the wall. Look at where you are, and look at the posters, look at the signatures, look at the everything, and just like pinch yourself for a second. And I would always kind of do that when I felt, that kind of coming on, because it was a special place to work. I left on my own terms from the Edge and went to another station within Chorus. That's when I went to Y108 in Hamilton, because there was, some big things that happened that, were, well reported on in the news and everything around that time, like late 2009 with, Martin being let go and what happened with him, Barry Taylor being let go as well, which were, kind of the core of the station outside of the major day parts. They were some of the guys who made the cool stuff happen. It just had a different feeling then. And I came out kind of just doing the same thing. So I was like, oh, well, if they didn't bump me out now, I'm not going to wait another 5 years. So then I went to do middays at Y108 in Hamilton after that. But it was a tough one to, I saw that opportunity, and the idea of a Monday to Friday gig was really appealing at that point, because I'd done about 5 years of kind of working anywhere and a lot of weekends and all that stuff. But yeah, it was definitely tough to leave. It was, I wanted to do more there, I guess, in those years.
So interviews, what's an artist or a band where like one of the first ones, if you can remember, where you just kind of had to pinch yourself a little bit and go like, whoa, like I'm one-on-one with this person or this band?
Weezer. I was filling in for Bookie and they came in and I got to interview Rivers Cuomo sitting across the desk from me knitting. And I asked him, so like, and he said that he was knitting something for his newborn daughter who is hoping to see very soon. And I'm like, oh my God, like every ovary in the listening area just bursted right now from what you said. That's the sweetest thing ever. Like, oh my God. And he's just as sweet and as kind of quirky and odd as you would expect him to be, and that was, I remember it was hot and I was wearing a sweater and I had printed off a couple questions from, like, I would say like, hey, Weezer's coming in, you want to ask Weezer a question, send a couple questions. You never know, you might get something good. And I grabbed one and I started reading it and it wasn't the one that I wanted to read. There was like a couple questions I copied and pasted onto this page. And I don't know why I copied this, and it was a dumb question and it went over like a lead balloon. And like that, I just started, I'm like, oh man, this sucks. But it got a lot better. Then it moved on to the knitting, and but there's those moments of like terror, and that was the first real big artist that I interviewed in person.
It just dropped in your lap. It's just like, Darryl, you're up.
Yeah, I happened to be the guy who was covering the shift, and a lot of my great interview kind of opportunities came that way. Like I used to do the weekend shift. So when Virgin Festival happened in Toronto, that was the best festival. To me, that was the best music festival in Canada. Like I remember one year being like Oasis and the Foo Fighters back on Earth played. It was big, It kind of filled in the space that Edgefest held in the 90s, on that level of a festival. And because I did 5 to 9 on Saturday, I would get to interview like the bands that were coming up to the main stage at that time. And I remember one of them, Muse was headlining. And it was like, are they going to get here? Like we're going live from the Phoenix at 9:00. We're it's tight on time. And I was doing my last break and I was basically getting ready to say, like Martin Shriek from the Phoenix is coming up next. We're wrapping up here at Virgin Festival, back tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. And the guy, Ken Green from Warner, kind of popped his head into the mobile studio and he's like, yeah. And so I was like, this nonverbal eye communication of like, they're here. I'm like, okay, they're here. Come on, we are going to get them. So then they came and sat down and we had a chat, and that was Muse, and so there was some moments like that there that happened that, were pretty amazing. Like pinch yourself moments. I was just lucky. Like there's a lot of right place, right time. Working around, Dave Bookman, who's probably the best interviewer ever, was a huge inspiration. I love Bookie. I got to do a really cool one too. This is funny because I was filling in, I was doing the afternoon show, and I think it had to be, otherwise Bookie would have been there. I think this is so they'd already brought Fearless Fred into the Edge at this point, and Bookie was on evenings. Now, I was filling in afternoons because Fred was away for some reason, and U2 was in town. And the call came down that they were going to come into the studio that day. And I'm on the air, and I was like, at first I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to interview U2. And then that kind of set in on me for a second. I'm like, oh, there's going to be TV cameras here. I'm like, holy fuck, I'm going to interview U2. And so then I turned to, I think Ross was the program director, and they laughed at me and they're like, no, Darryl, Bookie's coming in. Because he had set it up. He had apparently run into them in a bar in Boston. And through the magic of Bookie, he got U2 to come into a radio station That just didn't happen. You didn't get artists like that era. There was like the Foo Fighters came in, and like, but it was a big deal. Like when U2 came through, like there was like cops, that there's crowd control, there was all sorts of stuff going around that street level studio. And there's a video of it somewhere that exists on the internet, because I was running the board. It's like, okay, well, if I'm doing the shift, Bookie's coming in, you tell the audience, Bookie's coming in, U2's going to be here, this is happening. And so I said to him, like, look, you just focus on the band, I'll make sure all the mics are set, everything. And there's a video of this where someone is kind of like coming up the stairs towards the console, and I'm just turning everyone's mics on, and Bookie's there. And then I realize I'm on camera, and I kind of look up and go, and just and then Bono was giving Bookie a massage. And so he's like, I see the Edge and Adam Clayton, Larry Mullen Jr. And you can tell he's looking for Bono. Like, where's Bono? And Bono's giving him a massage. And so I think it's possible that he thought the massage was coming from me for some strange reason. So by that measure, I might have been mistaken for Bono. It's quite possible I was mistaken for Bono. And then he turned around and saw Bono, and he was just like, oh, it's you. And it was just this like this really great kind of moment that happened that is like holy shit, I'll never forget that. The magic of Dave Bookman,
No, it's these stories, like, they're amazing, because like one of the things too with bands, it's like these collisions. It's like if you didn't accept that job, up in Timmins necessary, if you didn't do the overnights with the doing the jungle stuff, the drum break stuff, it's like all these things add up to how you got here. And that'd be one of those things where you could probably place it like 3 or 4 events that happened and decisions you made that got you there, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm loosely interviewing you two right now. This is pretty rad. I'm
on set, like I'm with
you're there.
All of them, like Bono's right there, like you know.
Yeah,
like,
it's tell bands, it's like, you, as much as I'm gonna do a whole talk about why I think practicing's not worth your time, but it's just like you need to get out and meet people. You need to get out and have these collisions. It's like, get out of your rehearsal space and go play some shows, go tour, go to shows. Go. Yeah. One of the short stories I wanted to tell. It's like when Dead Set was playing in Ottawa with Fozzy, and it's like, you were there.
Yeah, I went to that.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's like, though you're probably there for Fozzy, it's like you being there.
I was bummed because I wasn't able to get there in time.
Yeah, but like we're so used. And again, people on radio, cover yours for a second. We're so used to people saying, yeah, no, we'll see you there. We'll be at the show. Yeah, guest +1 sounds, and they don't go. And it's like, it's okay, because we know that like they go to a lot of shows, and they've probably seen a lot of bands, and like they want to go home. Like they're done work for the day. But there are people like yourself that like, you're still interested in seeing shows and seeing new bands, and like, and again with Darryl Talks to Bands, it's like talking about emerging artists. It's like, not everyone's into emerging artists. Not everyone's still listening to new bands. Yeah,
it's something that a lot of people lose, is they get about their late 20s, and they're like, I've discovered the music that I like, and this is what I'm going to listen to for the rest of my life. And if something comes in their world that is new that they like, maybe they'll catch on to that or whatever, right? But your musical tastes are kind of full
set, yeah.
But for me, I've just always been, and it's always been kind of across the board too. Like the episode that I have coming out tomorrow is, musically a little bit different. It's more electro than like a straight ahead kind of rock band. And it's an artist that I met through Indie Week and had some really cool material. I thought, like, this is awesome, even though it's kind of, maybe it's a little left to center of what's been in the podcast so far. But to me, it's like, interesting new music is interesting new music, and anything that falls under the realm of kind of rock and alternative, which is a wide umbrella these days, can sometimes catch my attention. And if I dig it, then other people might too. So it's so hard for Canadian bands and artists and new artists to kind of crack through. So I think people that introduce other people to music are important. So I like to think that I'm not useless. You know what I mean? Because that's essentially what it is. I think a lot of the podcasts of my podcast, there was always a vision to have some of the Ottawa bands in, because I'd kind of immersed myself into this music scene here with my work in radio. And there's a couple bands that I just really believe in. I'm like, these guys are fucking awesome, and more people need to know about them. You know, the Civilians, the Old James, the Double Experiences. I mean, I then learned Double Experience has like a big international kind of reach based on the hard work those guys put in. But a great live band, you know, and there's so many here. So I didn't expect that coming into Ottawa, and I was coming from Kingston. So we're still in like the same area code. But I just didn't think that Ottawa had, you know, what it has going on. So if I could get some big artists in the podcast, like get some big fish along the way and mix those in with some independent bands, then, you know, maybe that helps push them and, you know, makes a relevant show that people are interested in too. So like that's always the goal and the vision for it.
Well, it certainly doesn't hurt having the bigger fish come in, help draw some eyes to it. So
yeah, those are ones that are really fun too. I mean, you get a little bit more. You gotta really do your homework and try to plan for a couple good moments in those interviews. Yeah, because you got a big guest, now you gotta create something.
You gotta make it good. Gotta make it count.
You gotta be engaged.
I have two more questions that I want, two more topics. I'm gonna narrow down to the one more topic.
All right.
You've been interviewing bands and artists for decades at this. This is called decades at this point. What's some advice you would give a band or artist, or some pet peeves you have during interviews?
During interviews?
Yeah.
I mean, from listening to interviewers, or from
you interviewing bands, or just like, I wish you wouldn't do this, or like, why can't you just do this? Why can't you just say it this way, or like.
So I have a thing actually with because I've coached a few interviewers as well, is I look at it more from how the host handles it than, because whatever the artist or the interview subject says, it should be a result of what the interview has prompted them to say. So an interviewer should talk very little, or as little as possible almost, especially you can ask too long of a question is what I think I mean, is that like someone might ask a guitar player. So it's like, so when you started playing guitar, you know, did you start playing with a pick, or did you just kind of finger pick it? Or did you use those like banjo picks on each finger? Or did you do this? Like you give them every possible option to the point where they have nothing to say really. It's like, oh, well, I kind of, you know, and why are you trying to guess the answer to your own question? But it's such a common thing. You hear it all the time. I catch myself doing it sometimes too. Or feeling they have the need to fill in a little moment of silence or dead air where someone's thinking of something. Those are okay. And the brain says something wrong is happening here, so you have to fill it with an or an ah. You have to make some sort of audible thing to fill that space when you don't. I would, if I had phone interviews in the early stages, I remember doing this, was I would listen back to my interviews and I'm like, man, why don't I just shut up sometimes? And so I would turn my microphone off. And if the person was done and there was a second or 2 seconds of silence there where it's like, okay, I've said what I've had to say and it's my turn to jump back in again, that's okay. And if you're recording it and it's not live, you can tighten that stuff up anyhow. It's way better than talking over someone. And I've seen some interviews. There's one that I worked with in Kingston who got really good when we started talking, and because it's just something, once someone puts it in your mind and you start knowing what to kind of be aware of, and it takes a while to kind of figure out what your crutches are too. The more you listen back to yourself, the better you'll get, I think. Which is tough to do sometimes, because if you don't really love what you hear, it's just tricky. I could be kind of pretty self-critical. I know there's a lot of radio people who are very self-critical too. And there's an art to it. And I think I could still improve a lot. Like I still try to like listen back and focus, like what was good, what wasn't, what you should you try to push further, and what do you need to pull back on. I love reading the latest Howard Stern book, Come Again. It's basically transcripts of some of his interviews with really big stars, but he gives you a little lead into it and tell you what he was thinking and, kind of what was going on, maybe his relationship with this. There's an interview in there with Rosie O'Donnell, who he just lambasted through the 90s. And he talks about like how he was a different person, and, how he's more empathetic now, and psychotherapy changed him. Like when he was on terrestrial radio, he just had to kill and own and win and dominate, the king of all media, right? Because your entire value is based on ratings, like that's you attribute that to yourself too. And he was the best at it, because I don't know if he had that drive and he wasn't good at it. If he kind of failed, he would have probably killed himself or something, right? Like it's honestly, because it's the kind of obsessive headspace that I think people in this business and in music can kind of, they're prone to doing that. They're these extroverted, larger than life personalities, and that's why they're able to be good at those jobs. But it can go far, and he talks openly about that, and it's super interesting to hear that kind of insight. And not everyone is. It's really hard to be as good as he is as an interviewer, because he gets people to spill stories that they've never told anywhere. And it's just like, well, it's the Stern Show. I guess I'll tell you about when, whatever kind of heinous thing you could imagine, or even just very incredibly personal things where it's like they feel comfortable to open up while millions of people are listening. That's an incredible thing. It's a real talent. So I try to do better.
No, on that tip, you talk about like, listening back or watching, over what you've done. It's like, that's another thing with bands. It's like, watch and listen to what you're doing. And yeah, it can be painful, but it's like, I always think of it as at bats. If you feel like you didn't do that good at that at bat, I think part of the drive and the hunger is going, well, I'm looking forward to the next one now.
Yes.
Because you want to do this. You're not just be like, oh, I didn't do very good at this, I'm just not going to do it, because it's easier to just, go back into the cave and not worry about it. Yeah.
And the thing with musicians, it's almost like, because you're going through the same you're playing the same songs night after night as well too. So it's like you have such like a recent thing to measure that against. It's more than that bat, because in that bat, well, I guess the course of an at bat could be a couple minutes, but what I'm saying is, like, on any given pitch, you might be able to knock it out of the park or make a fool out of yourself. Yeah. But when you're playing a song, there's more nuance there. It's like, oh, if you just kind of did this, like this section, and yeah, you can compare it to the way you did it last night. Like, oh, that totally sounded better than the way we did it last night, or those kind of things. I imagine those conversations happen.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's funny. We're talking about like bands and touring and stuff. Like, I think first and foremost, the musicians need to police themselves, because when you get really in the zone, you're not listening because there should be a point where, like, if any mistakes are happening on stage, they should be so minor that you're probably not noticing anyways. And if it's something that you want to, knee jerk look over at for a second and be like, whoa, something just happened there, or something threw it in the weeds. But it's knowing too, when you trust the people that you're on stage with. It's like, no one intentionally wants to make a mistake. No one intentionally wants to miss a transition or something. It's like,
yeah, but people are human too, right? Like, it happens, and it's how do you recover. How do you handle it?
Yeah. And that's
the ways, just don't even acknowledge it, just,
yeah,
nothing happened.
Well, that's where the experience comes in.
Yeah.
Because like experienced players know that people are human, and experienced players know that no one wants to go out and do a bad job. No one shows up at work and be like, yeah, I hope I do really bad today and feel like I made a fool of myself, and then I'm going to go home. It's like, no one wants to do that.
I remember, because I worked in Kingston as the Glorious Sons were coming up, and in their early years, that was a party band, especially too, right? Like, they were really a gritty rock and roll beer drinking kind of band. I mean, they're so polished in that, like, they're this big arena act now. It's amazing to see the arc of that band, because I saw them when people, like, when they just played at bars and people would show up and didn't even have to pay to get in or whatever. It's wild, you know. They're just one of those bands that I happened to see. And they were playing the Ale House in Kingston one night, and Brett was whipping his arm around, and he cranked it off of one of the guitars, and instantly there was like a golf ball on the top of his hand. That, like, oh my God, like, because we were standing right at, like, I was standing at the stairs, like right at the side of the stage, so you get a really good view, and I could see them. Honestly, it was more than it was like half a hard ball just sticking off the top of his hand.
It's not good.
And he called an audible to go into like a slower song after that. And the whole, like, they did it, you know, they did it seamlessly. And the show kept going on. He changed the next song that they were getting. I could hear him yelling at the guys. But man, that looked painful. And I was so impressed with how he just continued on. And, you know, even after he was nonchalant about it, it's like, oh yeah, that sucks. Fuck, it's probably gonna hurt tomorrow.
Yeah, no, it's funny when the adrenaline's going too from the show. It's just like, yep, this hurts. I will deal with this later. It's like, yeah. Brain's like, you have pain, you have an injury, and you're like, yep, I know, I got that. We just got to finish this, and we'll deal with this after.
Yeah. Adrenaline's a crazy thing. It can get you through a lot of stuff.
It can get you through some stuff, especially especially when you're on stage or in sports and stuff like that too. It just, adrenaline just push you through, and you're like, we'll deal with this later on.
Yeah.
Darryl, I've had you for almost an hour and a half. You said you had an hour tops. You said 60 minutes, and then you got to go. I said
don't go Joe Rogan on me.
Oh, okay.
There's another interviewer that's pretty amazing, actually, because his podcasts go like 3-4 hours.
And I'll listen to them.
1 million people watch it, you know?
Yeah.
It's wild.
We've been over that a couple times. Again, Spotify, you know, buying him up for $100 million to get him out of YouTube. And it's just like, it's the value around that real estate. And when artists are complaining about, Spotify's not paying us enough for our, 1,700 spins, it's just like, the real estate around audio is what we're after. Be it podcast, be it cooking tips, and be it the best song in the world. It's like, it's the value around that digital real estate and that attention.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what you're after.
The best advice that I could give to any person who's still working in radio or is to use that platform to build your own social networks. Build up, because I didn't spend enough time focusing on my own, because I was responsible for the station. So I kind of neglected my own social media until I started doing the podcast. And it's like, well, this is where I got to be now to kind of get this thing, out there and elevate it and get people aware of it. But I wish that I grinded harder at building up my personal followings when I still had that big megaphone to draw people to
personal brand. Yeah. Like that. Yeah. That's the day and age that we're in. It's just like, and even people within bands, it's like everyone in don't just be the bass player or the guitar player. It's like, get your voice out there. I always tell people too, like, one of the easy hacks for it's like, yeah, we get it. You like music, but like, pick 2 other things that you can talk about. And then that's going to give you so much more content for your socials and other groups that you can be part of. And, it'd be awesome if you're really into gardening, but you're like, someone's like, hey, I don't really like the music you play, but I really like gardening. So like, that's where you can kind of come together on it. And now you've got another person that's into your personal brand. Or
you connect with something besides your music with your existing fans too. And they're like, oh my God, like they're into gardening like I am, And
they double down on it. No, there's so much more the musicians can be doing to help build their personal brand. You said it's just like the biggest basket to put the eggs in is your own, and just like make sure that you're the hub of your business.
I really think that, with content creators, with musicians, the future is building your own communities. And then, there's ways to monetize those. And why just leave it up to, corporations to go out and, like, I think the idea of I'll give you one last thing. Or do you want to go?
No, you got all the time.
Okay. I got one thing. We've talked about this a lot, like with the content creators. I'm on Dean's network, Dean Blundell's network, which there's I mean, the podcast network there is pretty impressive. And the idea of radio stations, because their web numbers, you can compare the analytics between what they're doing and what certain other websites are doing. So you compare it against radio websites because you're in the content that kind of you're in a similar space, and they do way more than I mean, we looked at it against the traffic on edge.ca, and it was like, oh my God, it's like more. And they don't have that big megaphone to bring people into that digital space like a radio station does, right? So the idea of listening to a 30-second commercial or 4 minutes of them, to me, seems crazy in this on-demand world of everything I want is at my fingertips. Or when I hear on radio, it's like, hey, so-and-so has a new song. Tune in tonight to hear it at 8:00. You know what? If you're interested, you just drove someone away from listening to your brand to find it on their digital platform. That's the only result that I see happening if someone's interested in that, because they're not coming back at 8:30 to hear a song. It's not the way the world works anymore. So I think, do you sit there and listen to commercials if you're in your car and you're listening to the radio? Are you going to listen to 5 minutes of commercials to see what song plays on the other side?
If you're asking me, I'm usually listening to music or a podcast or something on YouTube or on Spotify. And
Okay.
I pay for both of those, so I don't get the commercials.
Right. There you go. So I think the idea of someone sitting there and listening to commercials in their car is insane as well. People just punch, what are my other presets? Are they playing something, or is there something happening there that I want to listen to? So I think they need to get rid of all of 30-second commercials. Need to be on radio a thing of the past, and they need to sell hourly sponsorships.
I would, this is a slippery slope as far as topics go. I would challenge that, because I think in the near future, we're going to get paid in micropayments to listen to ads, because they're going to split it with the platform and they're going to split it with the listener. So it's like if McDonald's wants you to listen to their ads, or whoever, or especially like local, because they'll be able to use geo targeting for because the amount of information that a platform like Facebook has for somebody, they could go, okay, well, you're an auto mechanic, and we know this person has a type of car that takes it in twice a year. It's getting about that time to get their tires changed over. So they could pay you through micropayments to listen, and you could use that on platforms such as Spotify and use it as credits. So I can go way deeper into where I think we're going to be in 10 years to get people to watch ads and listen to ads. But
that's an interesting kind of theory as well.
Why pay the station? Just pay the listener.
Yeah. What I was kind of thinking is that if radio kind of adopted this model, I think they'd be more sustainable. Is that if you can get people creating great content and put that on a website instead of jock bios and pictures from a concert that happened 3 months ago, or what you see on a lot of radio station websites now is on the front page will be their social media feeds. I thought social media, the point was to drive people to your website. And now when they get to your website, it's like, oh, here's what we're doing on social media. It doesn't make sense. You got to put good content on there. It's like interviews, exclusive performances. You got to get out and find great content creators who actually aren't really looking at radio as a viable career because they can do it themselves online. But once you have this great hub of digital content, now you have this big megaphone to draw people into it. And you can also use all of that content to put on your radio station in little micro a la carte kind of consumable pieces that draw people into it's like for the full thing back to the website, everything back to the website.
No, that's a good point.
You can monetize the shit out of your website. And now you're not wasting people's times with 30-second commercials on the radio station, and you sell these hourly sponsorships at a premium. So then you would just get in between songs instead of, because every station has imaging in between the songs that tells you we're badass and this is who we are kind of thing, right? You just do that. Brought to you by. You do a lot of this hour is brought to you by and whatever.
You're good.
Yeah. And people will pay for that because it's also they're the only client, they're the only brand that's going to be mentioned for that hour on the radio, and there's incredible value to that. So
that is an excellent point and an excellent model to work off. So
they just got to evolve, or else, I mean, the whole thing seems to be kind of.
They do. They really do. And yeah, I don't want to get into the story, but I remember made a comment a few years ago, sitting at a late lunch with a bunch of program directors, and it was a really awkward silence for a second, because like I'm someone from a band, I made a comment about Spotify, and everyone just kind of like stared off into the distance for a second, and then went back about their business. And I'm like, I get this is your jobs and stuff, but like there's
I used to think about satellite
things.
radio that way, and then they had that free. It was free up until like December 3rd or something like that, and like I always kind of like pretended it didn't exist because I worked in terrestrial radio. But then I'm like, holy shit, they got some great stuff on satellite. Like Tom Morello does a show on lithium. Like,
Yeah,
awesome. I loved it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'd say, yeah. No, I'm not gonna say anymore, but yeah, like some of the reach that we had on SiriusXM Octane and stuff, like it was bonkers. Like how much of a reach we had with it. With that said, and like a Nightmare in particular, but
for sure. I like that there's a guy on there. He's on, and the personalities seem to be on multiple channels on satellite. There's this guy Grant Random who's on like the rock stations, and he's funny because he just calls himself a douchebag, but he's got a good shtick, and like he doesn't abuse the F word, but it makes its way into his breaks every now and then, and it's just. I think there's some funny content. Like it's evolved. It feels more modern. It feels more up to date.
Yeah, I still think it can online. We're going to see more evolution of what's going on with radio, like as we knew it. But yeah, it's interesting to see where we're going to be in the next 5 years or so. Because I've been saying for years too, like the biggest issue, especially up here in Canada, was just phone data. It's like now that we've got enough data to stream all day when you're at work and you're driving, and it's just like you don't even worry about it. That's a big problem for radio.
Yeah, I just got lured back to my old cell phone carrier. I left them because I had this discount opportunity with a different carrier, and it was nuts. It was like 40. I think it was $40 for 10, and it was like unlimited 10 gigs a month.
Yeah,
but you get a less coverage area. So anyhow, my previous one called me, and I'm like, oh, you guys can't compete with what I pay right now. And they're like, try us. And so I told them, and now I get 25 gigs for the same price. And even I had to call about something, and even the guy at the call center, he's like $42 for 25 gigs. He's like, I don't even have a plan this good. He's like, how did you get this? I've never seen one like this good before. I just asked, man, and I asked a crazy question, and they said okay. And so yeah, bottom line is I stream the world now, so like data is not a concern. And just bug your cell phone carriers; they might give you a discount.
Yeah.
All we got.
I always said 10. I wrote a blog post about it years ago. Just said 10 gigs. 10 gigs that's the tipping point when it comes to people being able to listen to whatever they want in their car 8 hours a day, or at work 8 hours a day, and that changes everything as far as where you're getting your audio content, not just music or talk radio. It's like that changes globally. You can get whatever you want.
Wherever you want. Yeah.
So that's your competition. It's not the other stations on the dial. It's like
wild. Yeah.
It's Google and, Apple Music and Stitcher and Anchor. It's like everything and where you're getting your stuff from.
Yeah. Time to think big.
Gotta think big. Darryl, gonna wrap this up. Anything you want to plug? Anyone you want to mention?
Well, tomorrow I'll have I'm doing a video version of the podcast as well, which is kind of going to be the model moving forward, like for season 2, which will start up in early January, which is oddly enough the first one I didn't record video on, and I don't know why I did. I've got USF first episode of season 2, which will probably be like mid-January. It'll start up. So I'm going to be doing a lot more video to go along with the audio podcast. Tomorrow's a cool artist, Kit Vale and Neon Bloom. We met during Indie Week. So there's lots of it's cool because in the video version of the podcast, the actual music videos are in there as well. And so in the podcast, there's you just put the songs in. So I'm kind of it gives you a different way to look at. You're like kind of got to think of the way you talk about some stuff, because in the video you're actually going to see the videos, but like you're just anyhow. And I think I'm going to post. I mean, I'm pretty active. I try to keep stuff relevant to the podcast, like in the social feeds. So mostly the Facebook page and Instagram. I try to push stuff out there. So I think I'm going to kind of put some like the top 10 episodes together and put those in a post. So, people who haven't listened to podcasts, like here's a sample of the best ones, like to the most downloaded ones or whatever to check out. And then hopefully we get back to some kind of semblance of, normalcy in the middle of 2021. I could actually get to what the initial vision of the podcast was. That's the ultimate dream, really. That means live music is happening and tours are happening and all that good stuff. But
we're going to get there. We're going to get there.
I hope so.
And where can everyone find you, Darryl?
I mean, Darryl Talks to Bands. Google it. It's in a lot of places. I'm active mostly, like I said, I try to keep stuff on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But it's on all of the like Spotify. Like sometimes I'm amazed at the places that I'm like, I've never heard of this podcast carrier, but I'm on it. Yeah, the guys at over at deanblundell.com do a pretty good job of getting you high and wide. That's another place worth checking out too. There's a lot of, they post a ton of content there. There's like the site's always updated and the network is pretty cool. There's more radio people coming on. Mark McKenzie is doing a show on there, who was the morning guy at 89X, which was a great rock station.
Yep.
Which we know more. So he's in there. There's
excellent.
Yeah, there's a lot more than just music though. Like music is the small portion of that site, but yeah, we're a part of that too.
Pretty awesome. It's good. Again, it's good to be part of a team. It's good to be part of a hub and a network.
Absolutely.
Even though not in the flesh and physically able to have those collisions again out and about, but it's just like being part of those networks. And, the world just gets smaller and smaller with how we're able to interact with each other. And
yeah.
it's just like be part of those teams.
It's cool too in radio because like the job is to destroy the competition. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Like you're playing for a piece of the pie and those are your opponents. But in digital, when you get into digital content, it's not that at all. Like it's more about collaborating with.
There's a lot of pie in digital.
Yeah, absolutely. So like it's more there. I find there's a lot more collaboration, outside of your own kind of team necessarily, and cross promotion and opportunities. Like I've had you on my podcast. We're doing this now, which this has been awesome. Actually, this is probably one of the more interesting interviews that I've had. I think.
Awesome.
The intro may have been a 6, but the interview was like a 9.
Oh, thank you. So it's like a 7.5. Okay, good. I'll take it.
Awesome.
All right, sounds good, Darryl. I'll see you out in a second. I'm just gonna finish this up here again. I can't thank you enough for sharing some time today, making some time. I know you're busy.
No problem, man. I enjoyed it. It was good.
All right, sounds good. I'll see you in a second, Darryl.
All right, cheers.
I'm super happy I was able to get Darryl on the show for the end of the year. I'll full disclosure, I've been asking Darryl like the morning of, like, hey, can you? He's laughing backstage right now. I'm like, hey, can you be my guest on the show tonight? And he's like, dude, my podcast comes out tomorrow and I'm finishing it up. He's like, you need to give me a little more heads up on this. So I think I asked him on Friday. I was like, is that enough time? So I'm glad he could be here. I'm glad I could slip the story in there about when Dead Set was playing in Ottawa and he was there. I actually bought Cliff from Seville as well. And I was like genuinely happy to see them there because there's so many times where people from radio are like, yeah, we'll see you at the show, and they don't actually come out. And it's understandable because it's busy. But people like Darryl, they're music fans and they still have a hunger for new music and discovering new bands. And I think that's something that can kind of go away when you work in music, but often we find a spark that brings us back to what kind of got us there to begin with, and listening to his story of some of the hoops he went through. And again, he was saying, 24 birthday in Timmins by himself, being like, what just happened? But that led to him, eventually getting back into Toronto. And then not too long after, he's like, I'm loosely interviewing you two. Some of these stories you can't think back as your teen or something. Like, this is something that may actually happen in my life. So I love hearing these stories. I love talking to the guys with the radio backgrounds because it's like they have they have access to these bands that a lot of other people don't, and the interviews and the behind the scenes stuff. When we talk about behind the curtain stuff, it's like that's some of the behind the curtain stuff that I love hearing about. So, all right, it's episode 12. I meant to put the date on here. It's December 14th, 2020. Thanks to everybody taking part in the chat today. I see Katie's here, Kim's here, Dawn's here, Cindy's been here, Jeremy's been here. There's a lot of people that stopped in today. Sorry, I'll go through the chat after. Of course, my turn hanging out on YouTube. Much appreciated. I do see your messages. Darryl does see your messages as well. It's just difficult sometimes to bring those into the actual chat. If you're watching on YouTube, remember, like, subscribe, and comment. If you're watching on Facebook, like the page and just share. That's all I ask people, just to share. I'll put Darryl's details in, well, the details below on YouTube for the replay. Once again, I'm Mike from Langford.com and DearBands. Thanks for watching.